August 16, 1977, 2:56 p.m. An ambulance screamed through Memphis streets, carrying a body the world would refuse to believe was mortal. Inside Graceland's master bathroom, just 90 minutes earlier, the clock had stopped for Elvis Presley at age 42. But the real mystery wasn't when he died. It was what happened in the 24 hours before, when every minute seemed to contradict the next. 12 noon, a dentist appointment that would never be verified. 2:15 a.m., a request for pills that multiple witnesses remember differently. 9:30 a.m., a book, a bathroom, and a decision to sleep that became permanent. The timeline of Elvis Presley's final day is a puzzle where the pieces refuse to fit, because in those last hours, 3 different versions of reality existed simultaneously inside the walls of Graceland. Witness testimonies conflicted, phone records disappeared, and the prescription bottles kept multiplying in every retelling. What actually happened in Elvis's last 24 hours? The answer depends on which clock you believe, and which truth you're willing to accept about the night the king's time ran out. Before we reconstruct the final 24 hours that changed music history forever, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. We bring you the untold stories behind the legends you thought you knew, the dark truths, the hidden moments, the contradictions that official biographies refuse to address. Hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to discover about Elvis Presley's last day alive will challenge everything you've been told for 46 years. The official timeline begins on the afternoon of August 15th, when Elvis Presley was allegedly seen walking through Graceland's music room. According to his cousin Billy Smith, Elvis appeared agitated that afternoon, pacing between rooms, asking repeatedly what time it was. Billy would later tell investigators that Elvis checked his watch 3 times in 5 minutes, unusual behavior for a man who rarely cared about schedules anymore. But here's where the first contradiction emerges. Graceland's housekeeper, Nancy Rooks, insists she didn't see Elvis downstairs at all that afternoon. In her testimony, she stated definitively that Elvis remained in his upstairs bedroom suite from noon until after dark. 2 people, both claiming to be in Graceland at the same time, remembering 2 completely different realities. This wasn't just a minor discrepancy. It was the beginning of a timeline that would fracture into multiple irreconcilable versions. Elvis's stepbrother David Stanley claimed he saw Elvis around 3 p.m. in the Jungle Room, watching television, surrounded by prescription bottles on the coffee table. David counted at least 6 bottles within arm's reach, but when investigators cataloged the scene, they found only 3 bottles in that room. Where did the other 3 go? More critically, was David remembering the right day? When pressed during a 1979 interview, David admitted he couldn't be certain if what he remembered was August 15 or August 14. The days had begun bleeding together in the final weeks of Elvis's life. But while memories conflicted about Elvis's afternoon, everyone agreed on one thing. By evening, something had shifted. Around 6 a.m., Elvis made a phone call to his personal physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos, known as Dr. Nick, requesting a prescription refill. According to Dr. Nick's testimony, Elvis complained of dental pain and requested Dilaudid, a powerful opioid painkiller. But here's the mystery. The pharmacy's records show the prescription was filled at 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Elvis allegedly made the call. Either the pharmacy's timestamp was wrong, or Elvis's call came after the prescription was already prepared. Dr. Nick insisted it was Elvis who called. The pharmacy clerk remembered a different voice, possibly one of Elvis's bodyguards, and Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend, later claimed she was the one who called the doctor. 3 people, 3 different versions of the same phone call. The clocks at Graceland were already beginning to lie. By 10:30 p.m., Elvis arrived at the racquetball court behind Graceland's main house, much later than the planned 7:30 start time. He was wearing a blue tracksuit that hung loosely on his swollen frame. Billy Smith later described Elvis's appearance that night as puffy but determined, noting that his breathing was labored but his mood surprisingly upbeat. According to Billy, Elvis played poorly but enthusiastically, the game lasting approximately an hour, ending around 11:30 p.m. But Marty Lacker, another member of Elvis's inner circle allegedly present, insisted the game didn't start until 11 p.m. and lasted only 30 minutes. Once again, the clocks disagreed. The racquetball game that night would become one of the most analyzed 90 minutes of Elvis Presley's life. After the game, Elvis sat down at the piano in the court's lounge area. He played 2 songs, Blue Eyes Crying in Rain and Unchained Melody, and according to those present, he sang with surprising power. This would be the last time anyone heard Elvis Presley sing. The moment was later described as haunting, as if Elvis knew something they didn't. But when pressed on the exact time, testimonies splintered. Billy said midnight, Marty said 12:30 a.m., and Ginger Alden somehow remembered it being closer to 1 a.m. After leaving the racquetball court, Elvis returned to the main house sometime after midnight. The final day of his life had officially begun. According to the most commonly accepted timeline, Elvis went upstairs around 12:30 a.m., accompanied by Ginger. But David Stanley claims he saw Elvis in the kitchen at 1:15 a.m., eating ice cream and talking on the wall phone. When investigators tried to trace calls from Graceland between midnight and 2 a.m., they found no record of any calls from the kitchen extension. Either David was remembering wrong, or someone erased the phone records. Ginger Alden testified that she and Elvis went to bed together around 1 a.m. Elvis was restless, unable to sleep. According to Ginger, Elvis got out of bed around 2 a.m. and told her he was going to the bathroom to read until he felt tired. He took a book, The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, and said he'd be back soon. Ginger claims she fell asleep shortly after, but Elvis's stepbrother Rick Stanley tells a different story. He insists Elvis called him on the intercom around 2:15 a.m. and asked him to bring up medication, specifically a sleep cocktail containing 2-enol-placidol and Valmid. Rick brought the packet upstairs, handed it to Elvis at the bedroom door, and watched him swallow the pills. Rick noted the time specifically, 2:15 a.m. exactly, but Ginger never mentioned this interaction. She never mentioned Rick coming upstairs. She never mentioned Elvis taking pills at the door. According to Rick's version, Elvis was standing at his bedroom door at 2:15 a.m., but according to Ginger's version, Elvis had already been in the bathroom since 2 a.m. These two timelines cannot coexist. The contradiction deepens when you add Elvis's aunt Delta Biggs, who lived in a basement apartment at Graceland. She told family members she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs around 3:30 a.m. If true, that means Elvis left the bathroom at some point, went downstairs for an unknown reason, then returned upstairs. But Ginger insists she never heard Elvis leave the bathroom at all. Between 2 a.m. and 9 a.m. on August 16, 1977, there exists a 7-hour black hole in Elvis Presley's timeline, a span where nearly every witness account contradicts every other. What is known for certain, Elvis entered the bathroom of his master suite at some point during those hours, carrying a book. He never came out alive. But when he entered, whether he left and returned, who saw him last, and what he was doing remains one of rock and roll's most contested mysteries. Ginger Alden woke up between 1 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. Her accounts vary. When she woke, Elvis was not in bed. She assumed he was still in the bathroom reading. She called out, no response. She knocked on the door, no response. The door was locked from inside. Growing concerned, Ginger knocked harder, calling Elvis's name repeatedly. Still nothing. She noticed the silence was wrong. There was no sound of pages turning, no sound of movement, no sound of breathing. Ginger ran downstairs and found Al Strada, one of Elvis's bodyguards. Together they returned upstairs. Al knocked, identifying himself, demanding Elvis respond. When silence continued, Al forced the door. What they found would be described differently by nearly everyone who saw it. Al Strada testified that Elvis was lying face down on the floor in front of the toilet, his arms tucked under his body, a book near his hand. But Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager who arrived moments later, remembered Elvis being face up, his arms by his sides, his eyes partially open. Charlie Hodge insisted Elvis's body was slumped forward, sitting partially upright against the toilet. 3 men, all claiming to have seen Elvis within minutes of each other, all describing completely different body positions. But the most critical contradiction involves the exact time Elvis was discovered. Ginger has stated she found Elvis around 1:30 p.m. or 2 p.m. Her accounts vary. The official emergency call was logged at 2:33 p.m., but the ambulance dispatch record shows the call came in at 2:28 p.m. That's a 5-minute discrepancy in official records. Even more confusing, paramedic Ulysses Jones Jr. later stated his unit received the dispatch at 2:15 p.m. and arrived at Graceland by 2:25 p.m. If Jones's memory is accurate, the ambulance was already on its way before the official call was logged. Someone at Graceland must have made an earlier unrecorded call. To this day, no one has explained the missing call. When paramedics arrived, they found Elvis lying on the bathroom floor. Both men described the scene identically. Elvis was face down, his body rigid, his skin discolored, his face pressed against the carpet. They immediately began resuscitation. Elvis was not breathing. His heart was not beating. In their professional assessment, Elvis had been dead for at least an hour, possibly longer. Yet the official timeline claims Ginger found him less than 30 minutes before their arrival. If Elvis had been dead for an hour by 2:30 p.m., he would have died no later than 1:30 p.m. But Ginger testified she was asleep until 1:30 p.m. How could she have slept through the exact moment of death happening feet away in the locked bathroom? Paramedics worked on Elvis for 25 minutes, performing CPR, administering oxygen, attempting to restart his heart. Nothing worked. At 2:56 p.m., they loaded Elvis onto a gurney and carried him down Graceland's iconic staircase for the last time. The ambulance left at 3 p.m., though some witnesses claim 2:50 p.m., others insist 3:10 p.m. The ambulance company's log says 3 p.m. exactly, but the police escort report lists 2:55 p.m. Elvis arrived at Baptist Memorial Hospital at 3:07 p.m. Dr. Nick was already waiting. Elvis was wheeled into Trauma Room 2. For 23 minutes, doctors attempted advanced resuscitation. Epinephrine was injected directly into his heart. Electric paddles were applied repeatedly. Breathing tubes were forced down his throat. But there was no response. At 3:30 p.m., though some reports say 3:16 p.m., Dr. Nick made the official pronouncement. Elvis Presley was dead, but the actual moment his heart stopped was unknown. It could have been during the 7-hour black hole when no one can agree where he was. In the weeks following his death, investigators attempted to reconstruct Elvis's last day with precision. They interviewed everyone at Graceland. They reviewed phone records, prescription logs, security footage. What they discovered was that nearly every witness had a different version of events. The times didn't match. The sequence didn't align. Some remembered conversations others swore never happened. The deeper investigators dug, the more fragmented the timeline became. Part of the confusion stems from the chaotic lifestyle Elvis had been living. His sleep schedule was inverted. He stayed awake all night and slept during the day. He would take medication to stay awake, then take medication to fall asleep, destroying any sense of normal time. When witnesses later tried to remember what happened when, they were guessing based on light levels, meals, and medication schedules, not actual clocks. This created a timeline built on subjective markers rather than objective time. But there's another, darker possibility. Some people were lying. In the aftermath of Elvis's death, Graceland became a potential legal minefield. Prescription drugs were found throughout the mansion. If investigators determined Elvis died from an overdose, criminal charges could follow. Dr. Nick could lose his medical license. Members of Elvis's entourage who procured pills could face prosecution. Suddenly, everyone inside Graceland during those final hours had a motive to reshape their memories, to forget certain pill deliveries, to misremember phone calls, to claim they weren't present during incriminating moments. The contradictions might not be accidents of memory. They might be deliberate constructions designed to protect people from legal consequences. The physical evidence found at the scene only deepens the mystery. When investigators cataloged Elvis's bathroom, They found the book, The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, lying on the floor, open to page 47. Reading glasses sat folded on the counter. A glass of water, half empty, was on the sink's edge. These details suggest Elvis had indeed planned to read. But they also found Elvis's gold robe draped over the shower door, completely dry. If Elvis entered the bathroom around 2 a.m. intending to read and sleep, why was his robe hanging rather than on his body? Ginger testified Elvis was wearing blue pajamas when he left the bed. But when paramedics found him, he was wearing gold pajamas, the same ones from the racquetball game. When did Elvis change clothes? Where are the blue pajamas? Even more perplexing were the prescription bottles. In the bathroom alone, investigators counted 11 bottles containing various sedatives, painkillers, and stimulants. 5 had been filled within 48 hours. 3 had been filled on August 16 itself, all time-stamped before noon, meaning someone picked them up while Elvis was allegedly still alive. Who picked up those prescriptions? None of the staff admitted to a pharmacy run that morning. Dr. Nick denied sending anyone, yet the medications were there. This suggests someone made a trip no one wants to admit to. Possibly because that trip and those medications are connected to Elvis's death in legally dangerous ways. The autopsy report, completed 2 days after Elvis's death, only added more questions. The official cause was listed as cardiac arrhythmia, his heart stopped. But the toxicology report told a more complicated story. Elvis's blood contained traces of 10 different drugs: codeine, morphine, quaaludes, Valium, Valmid, Placidol, Demerol, Amytal, Nembutal, and Carbital. Some were at therapeutic levels, others were dangerously high. The codeine level alone was 10 times the normal dose. The combination of sedatives created a synergistic effect that severely depressed his respiratory system. Elvis's body was shutting down from multiple directions simultaneously. But here's the critical question. When did Elvis take all those drugs? If he took them gradually throughout the night, his body might have metabolized them differently, potentially avoiding fatal toxicity. But if he took them all at once around 2 a.m., the effect would have been immediate and catastrophic. The timeline of ingestion matters enormously. The toxicology report can't answer that question. Only the witnesses can, and they can't agree on when they saw Elvis or what pills they watched him take. As the last person to see Elvis alive, Ginger holds the key to understanding his final hours, but her account has shifted over the years. In her initial police statement on August 16th, she said she woke at 1 p.m. and found Elvis around 1:15 p.m. In a 1977 television interview, she said 1:30 p.m. and found him closer to 2 p.m. In her 2014 memoir, she wrote she woke around 2 p.m. and didn't discover Elvis until after 2 p.m. These aren't drastic changes, but they're significant. A 15-minute variance might seem minor, but if Elvis had been dead for 2 hours when Ginger found him, that shift changes the approximate time of death from 12 p.m. to 12:15 p.m., which changes everything about what Elvis might have been doing before he collapsed. Ginger has also been asked why she didn't check on Elvis sooner. If he went into the bathroom at 2 a.m. and she woke at 1:30 p.m., that's over 11 hours. Didn't she wonder where he was? In interviews, Ginger has explained that Elvis often spent hours in the bathroom reading. It was his private sanctuary. She had learned not to interrupt him. But 11 hours seems extreme. Some investigators have speculated Ginger knew something was wrong earlier, but delayed calling for help out of fear or denial. Ginger has consistently denied this, but the question lingers. These were the men who lived with Elvis, worked for Elvis, enabled Elvis. They controlled access to him, procured his medications, and kept his secrets. When investigators interviewed members of the Memphis Mafia after Elvis's death, they encountered a wall of selective amnesia. No one could remember specific times. No one wanted to talk about pills. No one admitted to seeing anything suggesting they knew Elvis was in danger. This collective forgetting is suspicious but understandable. These men had watched their friend deteriorate for years. They enabled his addictions because saying no to Elvis meant losing everything. In the hours after his death, they faced a terrible reality. They were complicit. And the only way to protect themselves was to forget, to misremember, to keep the timeline murky. Radio stations interrupted regular programming. Television networks went to breaking news coverage. Fans began gathering at Graceland's gates within minutes, the crowd swelling to thousands by evening. Inside Graceland, chaos reigned. Family members arrived hysterical. Business associates arrived calculating financial implications. Journalists demanded access, demanded answers. And through it all, the people who had been inside Graceland during Elvis's final hours retreated into silence, already constructing the versions of events they would tell for the rest of their lives. By the time the sun set on August 16th, the timeline was already fracturing, the truth already slipping away into contradiction and confusion. In the 46 years since Elvis Presley's death, dozens of books have analyzed his final day. Investigators have re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined evidence, reconstructed timelines down to the minute. But the more they dig, the less certain anything becomes. The clocks at Graceland on August 15 and 16, 1977, were not measuring objective time, they were measuring memory, fear, guilt, and denial. Every person who lived through those hours carries their own version, shaped by what they saw, what they didn't see, and what they needed to believe. The result is not one timeline but many, all overlapping, none complete. Elvis Presley died alone in a bathroom, surrounded by pills, holding a book about Jesus at age 42. The exact minute he took his last breath will never be known. The precise sequence of events leading to his collapse will never be fully reconstructed. The contradictions in witness testimony will never be resolved. What remains is a mystery wrapped in a tragedy, wrapped in a timeline that refuses to hold still. A final puzzle from a man whose entire life was a performance, even in death. The clock stopped for Elvis on August 16, 1977. But they stopped at different times, in different rooms, witnessed by different people, each telling a different truth. And that, perhaps, is the most fitting end for the king. A man who existed in so many versions that even his death couldn't settle into a single simple story.